Hello and welcome to episode 294 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always with...
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How are you?
Hello, Jason. I'm well. I'm just back from the vaccine jabbings, so I'm sitting here with some sore arms. But as we alluded to last week, I am nowhere near as sore as you are, good sir. How are you doing?
Yes, I feel like I have been punched in the face by an oral surgeon because that's basically what happened. I had a couple wisdom teeth removed last Thursday, and I am still very much feeling it. Do not recommend.
Are you feeling less wise?
Every day. That's a pre-existing condition, though.
Oh, all right. Let's get into the aviation news. This week, 3 aircraft from 3 separate airlines, at least so far that we know of, were struck by gunfire while attempting to land in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. What?
That's not good.
That's not good at all.
No, but the crazy thing is, I think we talked about this.
It's not privately. The first time.
This has happened before. Recently, too. Do you happen to recall who it was?
It was a SmartLynx A321, but I'm not sure who they were operating for.
On behalf of, yeah.
Yeah.
This was not great. In the case of this version of the incident, it was Spirit, JetBlue, and American aircraft, again, that we know of, with Spirit kind of triggering, poor choice of words there, but for lack of a better terminology, Spirit triggering.
Instigating.
Well, I don't know if they instigated, but they were the straw that broke the camel's back here, bringing this to people's attention because the bullet pierced not just the skin of the aircraft, but into the cabin and actually injured a flight attendant, I believe. That aircraft did not land in Haiti. I believe it went over to the Dominican Republic, was it?
Yeah, Santiago in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, and that aircraft, I believe, is still there. Spirit shuttled another aircraft over from, I believe, South Florida somewhere, one of their hubs, and brought the passengers back to Fort Lauderdale because U.S. airlines are no longer allowed to operate to Haiti. An FAA emergency safety notum issued declares that no U.S. airline outside of very emergency situations is allowed to fly in Haitian airspace below 10,000 feet at this point. It is in place for 30 days, though I would not be surprised, given the conditions there, if this was extended indefinitely.
I mean, yeah, at least on a rolling basis. So as Jason mentioned, the Spirit flight was struck by gunfire, and the flight attendant that was injured, we're not sure at this point, at least I haven't seen anything definitive, whether the flight attendant was struck by the bullet, which I don't think, or struck by debris in the cabin, which I believe was the case, because it didn't sound like they were seeking dire medical attention.
No.
But it sounded like they did need to go to hospital. But the interesting thing, and I want to bring this up, is JetBlue had their aircraft inspected upon return to New York. So they did a round trip from New York to Port-au-Prince and then returned to New York, and they investigated the aircraft when it returned and found that it had also been struck by gunfire. But American Airlines, after having heard that this was a thing, let their aircraft fly for a few more flights before looking at the aircraft and then finding that it had also been struck by a bullet.
What's one extra hole in the fuselage on top of, potentially damaged components that could become a real problem at any moment? It's probably fine.
It's probably fine. And thankfully it was. And they've, taken the aircraft out of service for a couple of days to patch it. I wonder, do you have to follow the path and see if the bullet's still in there?
I would guess you have to follow the path to see, like I alluded to, what it could have potentially damaged along the way. Did it nick a hydraulic line or a fuel line or an electrical line? Did it take insulation off an electrical line that could result in arcing later down the road? Yeah, I guess they have to go all kind of CSI Miami International Airport on that aircraft and kind of trace the path of the bullet, enhance, and take some pictures and enhance some more. And see what it could have done. Because we did see pictures, I believe it was a Spirit aircraft, where the bullet went through the fuselage, went through the floor of the cabin, hit an overhead bin, and then it went somewhere.
If you want to follow that particular aircraft, it's still in the Dominican Republic. The registration for that aircraft is November 966 November Kilo. So that's an A321neo. So unfortunately, Spirit's down another A320neo.
Yeah, that couldn't have been one of the CEOs that it's about to give away or sell for a dime. That's too bad.
Apparently not. So yeah, like Jason mentioned, the FAA has issued an emergency notum. The airport is effectively closed anyway, given that people were shooting at aircraft. Not a great situation, though not entirely, I guess, unexpected at this point, as basically gangs have taken over the city and are vying for territory and control, which includes the airport. So one of the other things, and this was part of an ops group bulletin for dispatchers and pilots and operators of aircraft, commercial and private as well, that there's a possibility that air traffic control services may not be available because the air traffic controllers are not safe. So that's another thing to layer on top of all of the things that are happening. So not great, and glad that there were no truly dire injuries for any of these flights. The three that we know about, and who knows how many more there could be. Jason, let's turn our attention to Spirit Airlines' financial situation, which is continuing to be worse and worse as the day goes on.
Yeah, not kidding when we said before that Spirit really could have used one of its aircraft that it was about to sell to raise some capital rather than losing yet another Neo. Because once again, it looks like talks with Frontier about some sort of merger have broken down, according to the Wall Street Journal, and Spirit Airlines is preparing to file for bankruptcy protection, unfortunately. We don't know what is going to happen. This is not almost certainly not the kind of case where the airline will cease to exist overnight. They'll restructure. They'll figure out what to do with their debt, and it's going to hurt a lot. It is not going to be a good time for the airline or any of the employees for the airline or any of its contractors or suppliers. But Spirit is in real bad shape right now.
Yeah. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal late Tuesday, I believe the 12th. We're recording Wednesday as we normally do. So by the time the podcast comes out, they could have already made their filing. They've already missed their reporting deadline for the third quarter financial reporting. So it seems likely at this point that we'll be talking about what a Spirit bankruptcy does in fact look like come as early as next week on the podcast. So we'll keep an eye on it and see what we see.
Yeah, really bad. Wall Street Journal says that the operating profit margin for the third quarter of this year was 12 percentage points lower than the same period a year ago, which is kind of nuts. But also, we've talked about this before, revenue is down $61 million, in part completely because of the changes to its business model, that they're no longer charging a change or cancellation fee, specifically in reaction to Frontier doing the same. So if Frontier's goal was to muscle out its biggest competitor, mission accomplished, I guess.
Yeah. From Spirit Airlines to Spirit Aerosystems. Spirit Aerosystems, last week we talked about how they were in also not great financial shape. And this week, Boeing announced that it will give Spirit Aerosystems a loan. Sort of, kind of.
Yeah, okay. I saw this reported by John Ostrower on Blue Sky. Apparently, repayment begins in April 2026, as he notes, is a date when Spirit is no longer expected to exist. So that's curious. I guess it's a loan.
And why won't Spirit Aerosystems exist any longer as a separate entity?
Because it is being absorbed by Boeing, the lender here in this case. So it's really hard to call something a loan if you have no reasonable expectation that you're ever going to get that money back. It's more of a cash infusion to make sure that your primary supplier doesn't die before you have a chance to buy it. Is that what's going on here?
I'm giving future me money.
Yes, I'm sure there is a very reasonable legal reason why Boeing has to call it a loan and not some sort of cash infusion. There's probably a tax implication. I don't know. There always is. But it's just very funny to say, we're going to give Spirit Aerosystems alone due in 2.5 years, even though we'll be closing that deal
It will
years
be
before
a
that.
wholly owned subsidiary once again. Yeah, no, I mean, they need the cash and they're going to get, I mean, we assume that this would happen. It's just interesting that this is how they're structuring it as a loan.
Nobody's ever offered us a loan for $350 million that we don't have to pay back. How do we get that?
That's a good question. We're going to work on that. If you have any, no, I'm kidding. Don't email us with loan opportunities. But we did ask last week for a Spirit Halloween themed podcast or explainer about what was going on there. And so many of you came through. Nearly all of you recommended the 99% Invisible Spirit Halloween episode that came out a few weeks ago. So we'll toss a link to that in the show notes in case anyone else was wondering what they should do as far as enlightening themselves as to how Spirit Halloween makes its money and makes it through the season. So thank you again for all the listeners who emailed us to provide us that information. There were a surprisingly large number of you.
Wow.
The Trent 1000 issues that we've been talking, well, Jason, we've been talking about them as long as we've been doing the podcast.
Longer, in fact. I'm sure if I look at our iMessage chat history, this dates back to prehistoric dinosaur times.
When we were still using ICQ, AIM, I don't even know. But the airlines continue to be impacted by these engine issues, supply issues, reliability issues. We've talked about BA's recent issues, and now we're moving on to another UK carrier, Virgin Atlantic. They are making additional changes to their route network and their fleets because of the lack of Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines. Virgin Atlantic is postponing the relaunch of its Tel Aviv service, which I'm not sure how much they can completely blame on the engine issues.
Yeah, that one seems convenient.
Feels a little convenient, but the new Accra, Ghana service that they announced that was supposed to start on the 1st of May will now be pushed back until the IATA winter season, so October 26th of 2025. They've said that the availability of the Trent 1000 engines on their 787-9s is what's holding them back there. So
there's more too. Aviation Week reports that Virgin was going to launch a route to Sao Paulo, Brazil, but it's no longer doing that as previously planned. They were going to start that initially in May 2024, and that didn't happen, I guess. And now it continues to not happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not great. On the British Airways side, British Airways had been using its 777s to kind of backfill the 787 capacity. That hit the snag that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where if you use an aircraft, you have to maintain it. And so they had to bring the 777s in for maintenance because they had been using them more. So they improved the dispatch reliability of the A380.
How? Great
news. But if you could do that, why did you not do that previously? I mean, I'm sure there's a good reason.
There is always a good reason.
I just don't.
I'd imagine it wasn't as easy as going on board and turning the dispatch reliability screw a quarter turn to the right. It's probably a whole bunch of very complicated things because the A380 is a beast that requires lots of particular and specific things to make work. But I really do wonder what they changed to increase the reliability. And remember, they never intended to bring these back. These were grounded during COVID. So not only are they back, but they're needed more than ever.
Bring them back and put them into service as much as you possibly can. And good for them for
if things get bad enough, BA might have to dip into the desert and pull back some 747-400s that were mothballed real quick. They're out there.
I don't want things to be that bad. But I wouldn't be mad if they did that.
No, whichever ones haven't been turned into hotels or event spaces or beer cans, they're out there. Wouldn't hate it.
I mean, if you had to fly in the back of one, you might.
Remember, BA refurbished a good chunk of them specifically and only to serve JFK. And then they were basically immediately retired. So they're not bad. They're out there. I flew on one, I think, in late 2019. it's a nice ride, but definitely in business class, at least not up to the standards of the rest of BA's nice fleet now.
Fair enough. Okay, so we've talked about the Rolls-Royce Trent engines. Now let's move over and talk about the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines. Those continue to be troublesome, shall we say. But Air New Zealand, a Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan customer who has suffered mightily under the broken engine or unreliable engine issues, they're somewhat taking matters into their own hands, and they're opening up another geared turbofan MRO line in Christchurch.
Yeah, I guess you got to do what you got to do. So reported by Aviation Week again. And I guess a lot of my news is coming from Aviation Week right now since they migrated over to Blue Sky. And I think Flight Global has not yet, but it's all good. The 14,000 square meter expansion is estimated to cost $150 million. I assume that is US dollars. Construction work is due to start now. The first GTF overhaul is not started to begin until the fourth quarter of 2026, that is, but it will give the capacity for up to 100 GTF overhauls per year by 2032. So this isn't exactly a short-term solution for an immediate problem. This is a long-term solution for an industry-wide prolonged problem.
Yeah.
And if they can make a buck out of it and fix someone else's broken engines, why not?
I mean, Lufthansa's been doing it for years.
Yeah, it works out well for them. And I did want to call out this fun quote from Marty St. George, the CEO of JetBlue now, who was quoted at the Skift Airline conference this week by saying, "You show me a Pratt & Whitney customer, and I'll show you an unhappy customer." Those are strong words coming from a rather high up individual. But man, that's not even a hot take anymore, is it? That's just kind of
That's just
fact.
how it is.
That's just fact. But
I mean, that's just how it is.
he's
You
saying
did
it how it
promote
is.
Marty, though. And I'm not saying he shouldn't be CEO, but you did promote him from president to CEO.
Yeah, my bad. Well, maybe, just a suggestion.
I'm not saying I'd be upset about this. I'm just saying that I don't want angry emails.
See, this is why I shouldn't read directly off social media, because what I was reading off said CEO, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right, but it says it on the screen, so I'm gonna read it. But maybe one day.
Fair enough. All right. Let's go to Colombia, where Jason and I are absolutely not flying Aerosucre.
I don't think we have a choice because we're not a box.
No, just no. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't even want them flying your empty box, is what you're saying. Yeah.
No.
One of their 727s, yes, you heard that right, a 727, impacted runway equipment. I think it was the ILS array at the runway threshold. Apparently, Flight 327 from Bogota didn't quite get off the runway when it needed to, and yet again went right through some ILS antennas. Thankfully, the aircraft was damaged, but was able to return in one piece. But that has not always been the case for this airline, and we will link to the list of incidents. But this is like...
Because you said yet again, Jason.
Yes,
like it's happened before.
It has happened before. This airline is basically an aviation museum that is still operating. All of its recent incidents have been 737-200 freighters, 727-200 freighters, dating all the way back to the 1970s when what aircraft were they operating, Ian?
This was a Curtiss Commando.
And what did you describe it to me as before we started recording?
I mean, the Curtiss Commando could charitably be described as a DC-3 with allergies.
Mm-hmm. It has some inflammation.
They're still in service, not a lot, but there's a couple still in service up in Alaska. I mean, they're great aircraft. That's not to say that, they're not great aircraft, but also they're not new.
No.
And they weren't new then.
No, so it's kind of remarkable that the Colombian regulators still allow this airline to operate. I think if this was anywhere else in the world, they would be long since disbanded and the aircraft donated to local schools and firefighting training missions. This is...
Their fleet, the youngest aircraft in their fleet, is 31 years old. The oldest aircraft in their fleet is 44 years old. And that's a 727-200 freighter. And they have 737-200s 737-300, a 737-300, and a pair of 737-400s. Not a huge fleet, but like Jason said, it's not young. But all of the incidents and accidents that have happened have not been because the aircraft are old. Or I shouldn't say all, but when you read the reports, they just don't fly good.
No.
And by they, I mean the people that work for this airline.
No, whether it's miscalculating the weight of cargo or doors opening in flight or hydraulic issues or flying into the ILS array at the end of the runway, this airline seems to run the gamut of things that you shouldn't do, but you can't blame the aircraft for, probably.
It boggles my mind how they're still in business. Just absolutely boggles my mind. Shall we go to Europe and talk about the fact that ITA Airways is ever so closer to selling itself, or selling 41% of itself, to Lufthansa? There was a hold on the deal this week as Lufthansa Group and the Italian Treasury seemed to have some sort of disagreement that Reuters described as between $10 and $200 million difference.
Oh, is that it?
With some pocket change between friends. But the list of remedies that Lufthansa is preparing to offer in order to get the deal to go through with the European Union has now been provided via the Italian government. So it sounds like whatever issues they were having have been resolved. So maybe they settled somewhere between $10 and $200 million.
Yeah, just bring back Alitalia. I just want the Alitalia name to come back.
They are. But
I want it as the actual name of the airline, not
it'll happen
brought
eventually.
to you by Alitalia. I want Alitalia.
It'll
back.
happen eventually. You know what else I want back?
Have you lost a bag recently?
No, I haven't. But I thought it was a good transition.
It was a good transition. But if you have lost or not, well, it's probably not you losing a bag. You've done nothing wrong. You are an expert traveler. You know what you're doing and you're prepared. And that's why you put an Apple AirTag in your bag. But ever since COVID, even if you put an AirTag in your bag, the process of getting that bag back, even if you knew exactly where it was and held your phone up to the face of a bag representative at an airline and said, "It's right over there. I promise you, just go get it." And they looked at you and said, "It's impossible. We can't go back there because the computer says it's still in Barcelona and you're in London." Well, I have good news for you. As of whenever iOS 18.2 comes out, you will now be able to, with select airlines, directly share a connection to your AirTag with the airline officially. So hopefully, if not when, the airline loses your bag, you'll be able to share that with the airline so their employees can go track it down and find what lost corridor or hallway or conveyor belt or thing it has fallen off, instead of trying helplessly to prove that your bag's actually here and not there. And this is coming, quote, in the coming months to, quote, more than 15 airlines, but the initial batch will be Aer Lingus, Air Canada, Air New Zealand, Austrian Airlines, British Airways, Brussels Airlines, Delta Airlines, Eurowings, Iberia, KLM, Lufthansa Qantas, Singapore, Swiss, Turkish, United, Virgin Atlantic, and Vueling. That's a nice smattering of airlines from all over the world. Good stuff.
Yeah. Seems like IAG, Lufthansa Group, and Air France KLM, right?
Yeah.
No, not Air France.
Not Air France. KLM.
No, not Air France. Just
not Air France.
Interesting.
And not American, which usually when something like this launches, the big three U.S. airlines jump on very quickly. Together. It's always United. Always United and or Delta, at least in the U.S. leading this. And of course, the Apple press release has quotes from both United and Delta, because you wouldn't want one to feel left out. Not shocked that Americans not joining here. But yeah, this is really cool. Finally, the airlines admitting that, yeah, we have a problem and there's a solution out there, that instead of coming up with our own crappy solution, we should just use what's already out there. Good stuff.
Yeah. All right. Let's stay kind of in the features realm of things. And Jason, you listed this as the return of club seating, but that's not exactly what's
not happening. Really. And I said return of club seating, comma, with an accessibility twist. So this was
I love a good accessibility twist.
You love an accessibility twist. Everyone should love an accessibility twist. But this, I believe, was an exclusive put out by Runway Girl Network, Mary Kirby's site today, that Airbus revealed a concept. This is not a product. It's a concept, and it's not something Airbus will build because Airbus doesn't build seats. One of its partners like Recaro or any of the other seat manufacturers. Basically, it is a cordoned off or portioned out part of the aircraft cabin where a wheelchair user could wheel their own chair on board, a powered wheelchair, to be tied down in position without having to transition that passenger to an aisle chair and then awkwardly get them into an aircraft seat that is probably not the best solution for them. Or in this case, Airbus has a concept where they have 4 seats, 2 opposite each other, facing each other, where the wheelchair passenger can have their chair tied down, and companions, travel companions, or anyone else traveling with them could also be seated in that little compartment with them. And it just so happens that these seats are facing each other, and it looks like Southwest's old school club seating that we will realistically never see again, but maybe we will for a good cause.
It looks like a mixture between like Southwest club seating and seating that you would see in a theater, like flip chairs.
Flip-up chairs like you'd see on trains or buses where a wheelchair is supposed to be tied down. It actually looks a lot like what you would see on a public transit bus, where it's just their seats that fold away and ties come up from the floor and hold the wheelchair in position. It's, again, just a concept. This may never actually become a thing. Delta, through its Delta Flight Products division, actually has a different solution where there are regular seats on board where the bottom flips up. And again, there are hooks, there are tethers that come out of the seats. But this is a much more, I don't want to call it robust, but just a very different way of doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good description.
So not the return of club seating, but also kind of.
Let's transition to some orders and not many deliveries. Let's start with the deliveries because there weren't that many last month. Boeing did not deliver that many aircraft, mainly because their machinists were on strike and they weren't building that many aircraft. Airbus, for its part, says that it's got a back half of the year or an end of the year backlog. So we'll see how many they can get out the door before the end of the year in the next 40 some odd days.
That's what I tell my boss when it comes to going through our goals for the end of the year. You know, I got a backlog of stuff I'm going to do by the end of the year. I promise.
Excellent. I believe in you, Jason.
Thank you.
But huge news, a shocker. I can't believe I didn't see this coming.
I mean, it's pretty unbelievable. But when you hear the news, you'll probably go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Air China will be COMAC's first C929 customer, because of course it is. Who else is going to launch the thing?
Take your pick. You've got basically three options. You've got Air China, China Southern, and China Eastern. Those are your 3 options.
Yep.
But, I'm glad they went with Air China.
Yeah. Oh, I clicked on the Reuters article that we linked here, and there's other news buried in here. COMAC also announced that Hainan Airlines placed a firm order for 60 C919s and 40 C909s, which we know is just the ARJ21. And then there's colorful Yuzu Airlines signed a purchase agreement, whatever purchase agreement means, for 30 C909 ARJ21s, 20 of which are firm and the remainder are options. So, hey, that's a pretty good get for COMAC, because I believe there's some sort of air show going on in China now.
There is.
We are not there.
We are not there. No, quite the air show indeed. Usually more focused on military hardware there, but certainly some good, interesting commercial orders coming out of this. It'll be interesting to see how many of those C909s actually get built and delivered.
Yes, the C929 is apparently, they say that the prototype will be seen in the near future, and estimated the jet could, quote, soon, unquote, take a test flight. That could mean anything, but the C929 is interesting because that used to be the CR929. It was being cooperatively designed with Russia. They dropped the R, now it's just the C929. So I don't know how much that set them back, but this is Comac's wide body, that their first attempt at a wide body version of its homegrown aircraft. So it's going to be real interesting to see how that goes. And I think John Ostrower also put out a tweet that somebody at the air show showed a model of a stretched C919 and likened it almost to like a 757-300. Good stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Sure.
That's something.
When it flies, we'll see it. I would still love to get on the 919. I mean, I think that would be a lovely thing to do.
I can't wait to make the jokes about some say people are still getting on board the first ever C919 inaugural flight because the thing's so long. That's a throwback to the old 757-300 joke where the aircraft is simultaneously taking off and landing somewhere else at the same time. It's amazing.
A big month for the excitedly named Avia Solutions Group, which has ordered 40 firm and 40 option 737 MAX 8s for Avion Express and SmartLynx and whatever other airlines they fold into their solutions group.
There are so many that I've never heard of before.
But a decent sized order there. So that's a good one. And they have, I mean, I think a really cool livery.
It is unfortunately cool because you're never going to see it in real life. I don't know under what circumstance this would you'd ever see one of these aircraft painted in the Avia Solutions Group house livery.
But it's a great livery.
It is, and whoever spent the time to design this, you should go to another airline that actually has airplanes. Because what is it, like a buffalo at the front of it?
I would assume it's a bull.
Oh, I guess that would make more sense. Yeah, but it's just a really good livery. And I'm sad that we'll never get to see it. But if you work for Avia Solutions Group and you have a model of one of these airplanes in house livery,
feel free to send one our way.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
We wouldn't say no. And then everyone's favorite airline, undisclosed airlines. Let's see. Airbus has won two orders from undisclosed customers, one for 5 A320neo aircraft and another for 10 A320neo family aircraft as well.
World's biggest fleet.
Undisclosed Airlines continuing to grow its fleet. This week, we said goodbye to Vistara. Vistara and Air India completing their merger, with Vistara going away, Air India taking over the airline and moving all of the Vistara flights over to the 2000 flight block. So if you're looking to figure out which aircraft are formerly Vistara aircraft or still operated by what used to be Vistara Cruise, those are AIC 2 and then whatever flight number they used to be. So that's how you'll know with the 4-digit flight number starting with to C. So that is going to be a slow ramp up. As Air India retrofits their aircraft, they will then turn to retrofitting the Vistara aircraft. So you'll probably see the Vistara fleet flying around as is for at least another year before things really start to move in any direction, where you have Vistara aircraft that are getting painted into the Air India livery and retrofitted with the Air India cabin. So nothing's going to happen overnight, but on their way. And congratulations to them, and hopefully they continue to move in the right direction.
Yeah. What else happened in news relating to Indian Airlines that ceased to exist this week?
Well, I don't want to say it's over, because the way these things go, it may never be over. But the Supreme Court in India said this week that the consortium trying to get Jet Airways back off the ground did not fulfill their obligations and has ordered the airline or the company that was trying to be an airline liquidated.
Okay, one step closer. This has dragged on since before COVID, right?
It's been so long. Let's see. 2019, the airline went bankrupt. 2021, the Jalan Kalrak Consortium got the resolution plan approved by the court, and 3 years later, nothing. So they're done. say, no, we're done. The ownership of the airline or the airline's assets has been transferred to creditors so that they can pay whatever money they have to those creditors. And this is probably the end of Jet Airways. Or maybe not.
We'll see.
But probably. In our final story, we were wrong, which is to say that I was wrong.
But no, we were both wrong. We have emails about two different things about the same topic in which we were both wrong.
I was wrong in fact, for which I apologize. Jason was wrong in conjecture, which I don't think necessarily needs an apology because now we know what's what. But first, where was I wrong? Last week in our story about the new US DOT rules on cancellations and lengthy delays affecting automatic refunds, I misspoke when I said that they were non-refundable fares were not subject to the rules. There are some caveats for non-refundable fares, but the rules generally do apply to non-refundable fares. I can read, I promise you, I just didn't read very well last week and gave out some wrong information. So for that, I apologize. In the course of our discussion, Jason queried, who buys these refundable fares? And a bunch of people emailed us.
And they said they do. A couple of people replied, some to me directly saying, I manage a very large corporate travel airline program, and we buy $150 million worth of refundable tickets in the US every year. Yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. You buy a bunch of tickets. If you use them, great. If you don't, you get them back. That's one way to go about doing it. But this listener did reply and saying that the premium on refundable tickets, at least in the US, isn't crazy anymore. It used to be like the regular economy fare was $100 and the refundable fare was $10,000. That's hyperbolic, but kind of not. It's more in the hundreds of dollars where a ticket might be, let's say, $200 versus $400 for fully refundable. So yeah, it's a thing. People buy it, but just not you or me. This is very much a corporate thing, planning ahead, unless you are really unsure about your travel plans. And then, hey, maybe it doesn't hurt to buy a refundable fare, but not something people typically do.
Right. So that's all we have for episode 294 of AvTalk. Next week's going to be a little bit interesting because we'll record a little earlier in the week. So news will have much more time to break after we record. I'll be traveling at the time we normally record the podcast, which I'll talk about not on next week's episode, but in the weeks to follow. It's going to be some good, fun stuff. Anytime they confirm that you are, in fact, a U.S. citizen and can get a badge for something, tells me that it's going to be a good time. So we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. But until then, I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.